First and foremost, thank you so much for having me today. It's my absolute pleasure to be able to speak to the group and to see so many of the amazing names and faces in here that just do amazing work in the field. Just do work in the field that every day, you get to read, refer to, and look at. So I thank you for all the work you do in your space, and for allowing me to come into your space for this period of time. So I'd like to pay my respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land which the presentation takes place and also where the presentation was developed. I come to you today from the Binjara Noongar Budja in the Mandra or Mandragorda area of Perth, Western Australia. This is a big one for me, and this is something we do every time we talk about working with young people. Working with young people with differences or at risk can often attract dehumanizing language. It can often attract human language that takes away from the young people's agency and the young people's stance and status is where they sit. Throughout this presentation and throughout your practice, I'm going to challenge you today and challenge you again to make sure that you are challenging these types of labels, okay, by visiting a prison, visit a school, speak to a teacher, speak to a student, and put yourself out there. Put yourself out there because using language in negative ways and dehumanizing ways makes young people victims rather than strong, powerful elements and vehicles for the future. So let's challenge and do this together. So who am I? I'm not going to go into a chunk of this. I've been teaching, educating for about 25 years in the principal class of a care school. I've worked previously and continue to work with incarcerated men, women, and youth. Work at University of New England in the community services team. And also, I think an important element of this is I was also previously incarcerated myself. So I bring to this a different level of the experience in this. And if anyone suffers from insomnia, I was lucky enough about a couple of years ago to do a TED talk that was prison to principal, which was my journey from a prison cell to being a principal working with young people in the space. So if you're struggling to go to sleep tonight, put it on 3 or 4 minutes in, you'll be snoring. All right. So first and foremost, what is the school to prison pipeline? So effectively what it is it's a whole set of current mainstream practices that we have experienced ourselves when we were students at school. Some of us, some of the people in the room here probably were suspended. Some of you may have served detentions or expulsions along the journey, or have had a phone call home to mum or dad, or have had your enrollment cancelled in some way, shape, or form. So what these are is these are current mainstream practices that don't fit the changing dynamic and the changing requirements and needs of young people in today's education settings. What suspension does is suspension is often sends young people home to spaces and places where trauma exists or where situations exist for them that they may not have the support to be able to allow them to gain improve behaviors or improve skills to deal with certain circumstances. Right the way through this principalship and through my time working in schools, we've seen young people who have been sent home, who have been suspended from schools, and it starts their role to antisocial behavior. And I know a lot of people look at it and think, oh, that's a big step. It's actually not. Think about this step and think about this story. Young person, no name for the sake of confidentiality. Young person comes from a broken home where both mum and dad are violent. Both mum and dad have drug and alcohol challenges. And this young man comes to an alternative school after being removed from two other mainstream schools. Said young person misbehaves at school or does something that the teacher does not deem appropriate. The leadership at the time send that young person home. The phone call goes home to young person's parents, young person's dad, who is working casually at the time because he has his own trauma and challenges, has to leave work, doesn't get paid for leaving work, comes to pick up said young person from school. On the way home, he stops off and sees mum. Dad blames mum for the behavior issues of said young person and violently assaults mum. Father then goes to pick up young person from school where this suspension has taken place, walks into the staff room, walks into the school, picks up the young person, walking down the driveway of this school, seriously assaults the child due to what has happened and what has gone on. Young person gets into the car as visual and climbs out the back door and runs away. Where does young person go to? Young person goes to the skate park. Young person then meets up with some other kids or other young people in the same breath, and some negative instances occur because there's no lunch. They don't have any food. So what do? They go to Woolworths and they steal food. And what happens in this instance here is caught from stealing food. Circumstances suggest, as a youth, we're going to call parents. What do you think dad does? Gets the same call, goes now. All of a sudden, in the same day, their child has gone from misbehaving in a classroom to being suspended to now being just as impacted. Now, I know that's a dramatic story, but it is a legitimate experience. A legitimate experience that I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I've seen 50 times, if not 100 times. And if it's not the skate park, it's the bike track. If it's not the bike track, it's the mall. If it's not a suspension, it's an expulsion. What we're doing with some of these mainstream practices is we're sending young people who are traumatized already home to trauma sites or to positions where their parents may have dealt with their unmanaged trauma and also the skills or lack of skills to be able to deal with some of the challenges their young people have. So what we're doing here is we're starting a really terrible cycle where if that situation occurs, what happens next? I'll use another example. Young person with a learning disability is in class, can't read, and this is a true story again, can't read and struggles to read at the level he's asked to read at. He's asked by a teacher in front of the class to read in front of everybody. This instantly triggers a flip the table emotion because he knows that if he flips the table, teacher's going to kick him out of the room. If teacher kicks him out of the room, what doesn't he have to do? He doesn't have to read. So he saves his face and saves his embarrassment. But what he now has to deal with is going to the principal, getting suspended, getting sent home. He comes back in 2 days' time to go back into the same classroom, to be reading the same text that is 2 days progressed. What's going to happen again? He not only has the learning disability, now he is behind the eight ball with the actual learning and teaching that has occurred in those 2 days. We're getting the table flipped again, right? So now we've just got the table flipped off and we've got another young person walking out the door. 2 strikes in some schools result in an expulsion. Where does this young person go? For having a learning disability or a challenge has put them into a place where they are getting expelled or sent out of school. They're being in a position where they don't have the supports of schools. And what these things result in is lower educational outcomes, involvement in risk-taking, as we mentioned, and then premature and early involvement in the justice system. Now, everyone in this room works in this space in some way, shape, or form. And I challenge some of you to look at the 23, 24, or 25-year-old person that you're working with in a prison and tell me that you can't see in their eyes, in their face, in their actions, the 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-old kid that had trauma at school or trauma somewhere beforehand that has put them into a road to getting to where they are now. Now, this is a map from South Australia. This shows what happens with exclusions. Now, we can see here with some really generic exclusions at the start and where this leads to. If we start with exclusions in year 1, this thing is a rolling problem. This gets to year 9, it gets to year 10, kids are leaving school, kids are just not going to be there. Now, this next one is the most disturbing slide. And this is who are we putting into this pipeline? 57% of the people that are being suspended, expelled, have a disability. 47% of people have a disability in this space. 5% are Indigenous only. 17% are 2 or more of these topics or these situations. So let's look at the numbers. We have 70% of the young people that we are putting into the school to prison pipeline that we are suspending, we are expelling, have challenges. How does that work? That's to me, as I'm sitting here, hopefully a relatively intelligent person, not only is that hugely discriminatory, but that shows that the current system is not working. That shows that the current mainstream education system is not working. And we know that because of the amount of alternative education settings and sites that continue to grow, whether it is relatively mainstream ones such as Steiner schools or others that still do education but in a different way, through to others such as the YMCA school, care schools, the Berry Street schools. Every state has these. Now, what happens with this? So, what happens once we put kids into this pipeline? This is this is 2025, so the last produced statistics suggest that 884 young people spend a night or spent last night in detention. Now, I want you to think for a second about your son, your daughter, your nephew, your niece, your grandson, your someone that you know, someone you play with. How would they go as a kid spending a night in jail? How would that work? I know as an adult how much that messed me up spending adult time in prison. Now, we're setting this thing up here for kids. We're making this horrendously challenging. Now, if we look at the states here, we know that there is a perceived apparent juvenile justice crime issue in Queensland. All right, you heard me use those words perceived. There's other places and spaces in that place where there are perceived juvenile justice challenges. Now, the crossover between educational challenges, similar to the message I just mentioned before regarding those two stories of the two young people we worked with, they're social welfare and welfare issues. They're not justice issues. What we're doing is we're forgetting and we're turning these justice and welfare issues into justice issues. By a young person not having the support and having an educational disability or challenge and having them result in going to prison because of it means that the mainstream education setting and the welfare setting is not working correctly. And that shows that. We then look at what happens next. This is young people in prison right now. We look at the states and places where this is occurring. We can see this, and I'm happy to send the slides to Sarah to send out to everyone so you can actually see these. These are ABS statistics. These are not created by the Lucas's School of Creativity. These are real. These are the ones that pop up and show you, and everyone in this field knows these. This next one gets even more concerning. We now have 72% of young people that are involved in the justice system are unsentenced. Unsentenced. So we don't even have the answer to the challenge. So the welfare problem now gets even bigger again. This pipeline gets deeper. We have people entering into that 72% that realistically, a large proportion of them shouldn't be there in the first place. But the welfare letdown is putting people into this space. And this happens through mainstream educational practice. Now, when we go further into this discussion, not only the nature of, but we look at the disability elements that roll with this too. We just saw before that 47% of young people that are getting suspended and expelled from school have disabilities. In a recent study that was done at Banksia Hill Detention Centre in WA, 89% of people tested had at least one form of severe neurodevelopmental impairment, and 36% had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Who are we putting in prison? 25% of children in custody in 23 had a diagnosed cognitive difficulty. Intellectual disabilities of 17% of the young people. 39 are on the borderline range. This is disturbing. These are the people that we're putting into this pipeline by mainstream practices and mainstream education settings that don't have the ability or skills to work with these disabilities or challenges. We then add a layer to this muck sandwich. And this is the idea of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. We put ACEs on top of this. So we've got disabilities, we've got learning disorders, we've got challenges inside the space where we have mainstream education and the mainstream schooling not assisting in those processes. Now we add adverse childhood experiences, which are deemed and noted to be physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, mental illness, mother treated violently, divorce, substance abuse, and incarcerated relatives. Of the school that I was principal, we had about 80% of our students that had 7 or more of these adverse childhood experiences and had been removed from mainstream schools, ejected, expelled, suspended, all of the above, and end up with no schools. We would, as a school and as schools, work with the education department to identify the disengaged young people and to try and work out individually what the challenges were and how we would individually develop a program for them. And the two common things that take place in all of those statistics that you've seen so far is the lack of individual focus towards the needs of that young person in the mainstream setting, and also trauma. Now, we understand trauma can often be generational to cross generational, using those stories that we mentioned beforehand with the young people. We know that a lot of trauma that we deal with in the education space is initial and it's not treated. It's a one off that hasn't been diagnosed, it's a one off that we don't know about. Often it's ongoing. Now, the mainstream practices of suspending, expelling, those type of things actually don't know it, but they're actually putting and literally throwing onto this kid some further ongoing labeling trauma, where the trauma is, oh, that's the bad kid. Remember when you all went to school? Remember we all had the bad kid or the trouble kid or the kid that talked too much or one of those kids that was there. I was the class clown when I was at school, the one that wasn't taken so seriously. Those labels, when we deal with these expulsions and suspensions, are the things that continue to roll on. We then create new sites of trauma. So we introduce prisons, justice centres, detention, foster homes. We bring these other new centres of trauma into the table and we add more to the cycle and we make the pipeline bigger. We don't pay attention to the needs of students. We can't do it in mainstream education. As a mainstream education teacher, the last classroom I went into was about 4 weeks ago, and it was my son's class. There was 40 students in the class with one teacher, 40 students in the class. How, and this is at grade 4 level. Now, how can one teacher deal with the individual needs of 40 people, 49-year-olds? Think about all the stuff we just talked about. Is there a strength or ability based education process occurring there? Absolutely not. I use the words holistic support, not holistic, because it's about who the person is. It's finding who the student is. It's finding who the person is. And I encourage you, regardless of whether you're educating a university student or a primary school student, find out who they are. Find out what makes them tick before you can then plan to what you deal with them. So then how do we look at tackling this? Not only do we need to look at the underlying reasons for the behaviors, and some schools are doing this. Some care schools and other schools are being able to put individual education plans in place, individual practices in place that allow for the individuality of young people and the holistic approach to be followed and looked at. Providing support and treatment for the behaviors. So instead of suspending the kid that can't read, here's a unique idea. How about we get him some support to teach him to read? Or work out what sort of situations we need to deal with to actually not have the young fella get sent home because the teacher that made the call and suspended him didn't understand his individual background, didn't understand the ACEs that he was dealing with, didn't understand the situation that he came from, because you can't do it with 40 kids in a classroom. Providing some alternative discipline. This is not an excuse, and I'm the first person in this line. I do not facilitate and allow bad behavior and suggesting that this is okay to get away with whatever you get away with. But it's doing it alternatively. Instead of that young person who's flipped the table getting suspended for that instance, how about we do an alternative space? Okay, you're going to come and work in a different room with us. You're going to have a different place and space to work with. Instead of suspending externally, it's an individual working group that you're going to come and work with an education assistant for the day. You're going to come into the room that is in with the youth workers, or you're going to come and spend some time with the care worker or case manager to go through and do some work with them instead of doing it at home. So that not only are we covering the education space, but we're looking at still admonishing and still going through the behavior, but making sure we're using things like restorative justice practices and the other, where people start to understand their practice and understand where they are. We challenge implicit racism and discrimination where it exists. We saw that with the Indigenous side. We see that in states and territories that incarcerate Indigenous kids for fun. We do it here in Western Australia, and it drives me crazy. And it just drives me nuts that we don't have individual processes and programs for that. That we challenge as a group of us in this room, that we challenge legislation restricting the use of exclusionary discipline. Not just expelling people because we can, but going through processes first. Developing respectful and empathetic teacher-student relationships, and that's through training. Therapeutic crisis intervention, looking at this and making sure we're aware of what this looks like. Understanding evidence-based practices and providing relationships between schools, service providers, not-for-profits, and law enforcement. Relationships are formed and developed where everyone can work together. Now, I was lucky enough a few years ago to get the chance to go and spend some time in the US on a fellowship and got the chance to go and work through a lot of um, schools and education facilities that were alternative. And these schools varied from in justice centres, in jails. Rikers Island was one of the centres that we went to, education setting, some other spaces and places right the way through some of the most highly criminalized areas in Los Angeles, in New York, in Las Vegas, in some great places, and saw that there is a lot of work getting done. The key elements to this are trauma. Now, in an American setup and now being run back in Australia, is the idea of the Berry Street model. Now, I'm not going to go through it individually, but it's something that I strongly suggest is they look at developing the young person through their body, through building relationships, building stamina for their own resilience and emotional intelligence, engaging them in different ways than is currently done in schools, and building their character for them to understand what happens next if they act that way, what happens next if the outburst looks this way, and to build this in a setting. Other schools or other methods of occurring this are care schools. I don't know why that is doing that, but anyway. So care schools. Care schools look after and work with a set of young people that don't fit or are kicked out of mainstream. Young people with drug and alcohol issues, gender issues, mental health challenges, juvenile justice involvement, bullying, social challenges, and family issues. Some of the great schools that are doing that throughout the country are the YMCA School, Youth Futures, Smile, Alta One. I can keep making the list as long as we can because there's some great work being done by some great people around the country. And this bottom one is the biggest growing issue where kids are being removed from mainstream, and that is other. That is the things that we don't understand. That is the things that us as adults that are making the rules don't get. This is the stuff that we don't see and we don't understand. So what care schools and other schools have worked in, they work in relationship with juvenile justice and corrections. At one of the schools that we were working at, we had an opportunity to try something different. And we actually operated as almost a quasi bail officer or parole officer for one of our young people. Instead of me knowing that for them to get to Perth, they had to jump on the train for an hour during school time, get up to Perth, go and miss a day of school, mind you, go up and do their work, go and do their check-in, and then catch the train back home again and actually get home in the middle of the day. And what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? We're setting them up to fail. So we worked into a position where we were able to develop some relationships where the phone call check-ins would take place. They'd come into school with me. They would do their hours before school where they would be cleaning the buses. They would be cleaning the school. They would be owning where they were situated. And we were able to then use that as an example to provide some support for the young person and also not to put them at risk where they would have to go out into that pipeline and go and experience stuff that they might not have the tools to deal with. All care schools work at encouraging and educating restorative justice practices, as we said. They allow young people, though, to attend a safe place. A lot of schools that work in this alternative setting with justice impacted kids are police-free schools. So police, for argument's sake, were not allowed to come on campus of our school. If they wanted to come on campus, they would have to come out of uniform. They would have to find something that was organised and done at a different time, because without a word of a lie, we'd have 2 police officers roll up to the school. I would have 10 kids scouring the 20-foot fences to get away because they thought it was them. And then what happens to those kids once they climb the fence? They ain't coming back to school again because they don't know when the police are coming back. So we're in the pipeline again, right? We're rolling the pipeline again. So splitting education, welfare, juvenile justice, and criminalization is super important. And crossing the borders over is really challenging. Now, there's a saying that I live by, and I strongly suggest for people in this space to work at this. We all do a lot of great work in this room, but there is also a lot of people that pontificate in this space, okay, who talk about and talk about and talk about without doing. I live by this one. It's a Japanese saying that says Genshi Genbutsu. And what it means is it is often used to describe the concept of going directly to the source of information or a problem. It translates to go and see for yourself and emphasizes the importance of first-hand observation and direct experience in understanding a situation or person. So before we are looking at challenging youth, a young person, making a description and saying this is what their problem is, this is what they need to be fixed at, go and talk to them. Go and ask a question of the young person. See what they're doing. See what situation they live in. Go and ask them. The challenge I say to people in the space all the time, if you're working in this area, when's the last time you went into a prison and spoke to someone in jail? When's the last time you actually legitimately had a conversation with someone that had come home? Okay, super, super, super important to consider in this area. Now, what I'm going to do here is try and do something I'm not great at, which is a change in technology. So let's see if I wreck this, right? I'm going to change screens and try and play a little video for a second. Now, if some people in this don't get a tear, I'm going to wonder because I always tear up when I watch this video. So if you turn your camera off, if you're going to cry, that's okay. This video is called Dear Teacher. And this is something that I show to not only teachers, but also people that work in the juvenile justice space, okay, and work with young people because it's tough. It's tough being a young person and it's tough working in this space. Sarah, can you give me a thumbs up that you can see this young fella on the screen? Can you give me a thumbs up now that you can hear it when I press play now, just so I know that I haven't broken the screen, which is highly likely with my skills and ability for the use of Zoom.
Oh, there we go.
All right. Okay. Press and play now. Hopefully you can hear it.
Dear teacher, I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I really do want to listen and learn.
It's just my brain is kind of different. So this is what I'd like you to know about me. I have to move, or I really can't pay attention.
Even though I'm not looking at you, I can still listen to what you're saying.
If you tell me, sit up straight, now I have to use all of my brain to do just that.
It makes me feel sad when you tell me to try harder, even though I've already tried as hard as I can.
I actually listen better when I'm rocking in my chair.
When you give me a bunch of directions, I start to think I will never remember all of this.
Sometimes my mom or dad ends up doing all of my homework. So here's how you could maybe help.
Let me get up and move while I'm learning.
Let me look wherever I want when you talk to me.
Let me rock or slouch in my chair.
No matter what, please don't take away my recess. Give me a hug I could do all by myself. Make directions very short.
Just ask me, what does your brain need right now?
And one more thing. My brain might be different than yours, but it's still amazing.
Sincerely, your student.
Your student.
Your student. Your student.
Doesn't matter how often I watch that, I always get a tear. I think I'm getting soft in my old age. I really do. I think I'm getting soft in my old age. When did that happen? All right. So that's a prime example, right? An absolute prime example. Think about that. If you're working in the space, ask the person, go and ask them, speak with them. And you just heard that. Think about some of those behaviors. Swinging on the chair. If that happens every day, the kid gets kicked out for that. If the kid's not looking at the teacher, they get yelled at, they get behaved, bang, it's a detention or it's something that puts them into this cycle. It is stuff that is so simple that we need to change. So in closing, because I know I'm being mindful of sticking to time because I don't want Sarah yelling at me because she scares me, is you've got to make sure here, right, that we are paying individual attention to the young people we're working with. That's the first part. And once we are paying individual attention to the young people we're working with, we can then provide the support to what they actually need, not what we think they need, what they actually need. Okay. And it goes back again. Ginchi Gembutsu, go and ask them, find out what they need. Ask the young person how their brain works, what they need and what they don't need. Then the next step, challenge what you see in practice. challenge the mainstream education setting of detention, suspension, booting kids out because it's easier to boot them out than actually work through the causes of them. Being a teacher, regardless of what level it's at, is bloody hard. Bloody hard. I know myself in my journey, I've had to cut kids down who have hung themselves dead in schools. It is not an easy thing to do, but helping one and keeping one person out of that juvenile justice cycle and that absolute pipeline that we all work in could legitimately save a life. Please reach out to me if you can. I hope this is what we were hoping you were getting from this craziness. Please reach out to me if you can. I'd love to collaborate with you, love to do any work with you and see what is around about and who's doing what. I will shut up now and pass it back to you, Sarah, and hope that was okay.
Gosh, thank you, and thanks for making me cry at the end there.
Still sniffing now, mate, because of that video.
Such important notes to end on, identifying different ways of learning and listening and engaging with the education system. I just find that the current state of the education system it just doesn't work for so many of our young people. And I suppose my initial thought, I mean, what I've been thinking about a lot lately is around prevention or early intervention. And I had a conversation recently with a pediatrician in WA and I haven't looked this up, so if anyone in New South Wales is on the call, she mentioned that in New South Wales, they've implemented a kind of a surveillance system in terms of when you're, if a young person has disengaged or not attended school for a certain amount of time, they will send someone out to the families to try and figure out what's going on for that young person and provide that care. But no such thing happens in WA. And that kind of made me think about, how can we start to do that really early work to support that young person and identify that young person's needs. I don't know if you have reflections on that.
It's an interesting thing, Sarah, and for the expanded version of this, and I was lucky enough to do some stuff last year over in New South Wales with through at the university through the Young People Are Struggling conference, and we talked a lot about exactly that, and we talked a lot about it. Even goes further than just having the mechanics of having that person visit the house. It's actually who's visiting the house. Right. So it's going in there and understanding what you're looking at, because you work in a case management space where we talk about bias, we talk about, challenging what you see and what you don't. And a lot of people will walk into things when they go visit someone's house, and it absolutely is a punch in the gut to them because it's like, wow, I haven't seen this before. We experienced that. We had a family at a school we were at who had 13 children. So 13 children in the house. Mum had some challenges as well. Went to their house because 5 of the kids were not coming to school. So took the youth worker and went to the school and walked in the door. And we walked in the door, we legitimately saw in the room 2 4 and 5-year-old kids with full nappies on that hadn't been cleaned for days. We saw one of the teenage girls performing a sex act on her boyfriend on the floor in the lounge room in front of the rest of the kids in front of the television. Dad was in the bedroom with the gambling on the horses because he didn't want to come out and speak to the principal at school, because last time he saw a principal, he got in trouble as a student. And I've never seen a pile of dishes and rubbish as high as anything. Now, I was able to manage that because I'd seen it and dealt with it before. But the youth worker literally went white, and couldn't operate, couldn't function in that space because they'd seen something that was challenging. So what happened then is that lack of real authenticity and real teaching and training puts people in positions that they can't deal with anyway. So we need to actually go step by step and talk about the processes, but then actually the mechanisms of who's undertaking the processes. And that's the bit that's missed out in a lot of other places, especially Victoria is missing that problem at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a, I don't know, complex thing to think about in terms of the workforce capacity. How many skilled people do you have to respond in those situations? And do you have, are they appropriately paid and enough positions funded as well that you can fill? Yeah, so much to think about in terms of that. I can see one, and anyone, if you want to have a question, just raise your hand in the chat, raise your hand in the Zoom room. But there is a question in the chat from Jay. They say, I am a student of criminology and just in criminal justice and currently working on a research project on youth crime. We have distributed surveys, collected data, and begun to analyze it. Your talk today is very relevant and has deepened my understanding on the topic, and thank you for the work you do. A question: what is your opinion of the new legislation in Queensland adult time, and the proposal to add 17 more elements into the legislation?
Okay. All right. Buckle up. Now, there's a person in this room there's a couple, there's more than one, but there's a person in this room that I trust implicitly when it comes to these decisions and discussions. This person has done so much in this space over the journey and continues, and she's going to blow her mind when I say this. But Lorana Bartels is in this room. Now, I don't expect Lorana to say anything now, but Lorana is someone that I respect extensively in this space and someone who I just love her work and what she does over on the East Coast. And in this instance here, I'm going to lean on a little bit of the legal stuff. I've got a little bit of a JD background from overseas, but I don't practice in anything here because it's hard when you got a record. But the reality is that we have to think about the politics cycle that occurs here. We have to think about why this stuff gets said, okay, and why it is said for. Now, we've seen it, and there's been studies of this previously where I think it might have been 2020, maybe earlier, the 2020 federal government or federal process was Victorian government has got a problem with African gangs. We're going to bang, 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 bang. Peter Dutton come out and speak about it. Everyone jumped up and down, and there's been a lot of research done on that failed approach, where there is people that are outside the state making commentary on things that are happening, as in, why is this bald guy from Queensland telling us what we should be feeling as a housewife in Melbourne? And that has been a lot of study that's done. So I'm mindful of positioning myself that I'm not in Queensland. So I need to say that first and foremost. As someone that works with young people, I think it's pretty abhorrent that we are linking again, though, politics and using it as a push and pull. But it serves its purpose for the people that are saying it, because they want people who are the white, middle-aged, higher income earners that will do the voting to vote for them to feel safe. It is another process of othering. It's another process of putting a distinct group outside the fence for everyone to feel safe. And we need to look at what othering looks like. So in the Australian context, or sorry, in the Victorian context now, it's an African gang. Now, I said this story yesterday in a presentation. I grew up, I grew up in Dandenong in Victoria, which was 2 streets away from from Apex Street, okay, which is where this apparent Apex African gang occurs. My mum still catches the train. She's an old lady, right? I'm an old man. She's an old lady. She still catches the train now. She gets off the train at the Noble Park train station, and she has some of the boys that are supposedly the African criminals that go to her and say to her, "Hey, Mrs. Mum, can I carry your bag to your car?" Right? She makes biscuits for the kids that are still running around the streets. She makes the biscuits for the kids. She said she feels safer in her environment where she is then because no one's going to mess with her because she's part of the community. Right? So ask those guys. And you're doing it in your study, which I truly appreciate you saying, Jay, that you're actually reaching out to the right people and asking the right questions. I'm an opinion from the outside, so I can give you that much, but I'm not the right person to ask that question to, if that makes sense.
Great reflections. Thanks, Lucas. And it's so true. I feel like there is such a political divide, and kind of it just makes me so angry that a lot of it is around money. And when you actually think about it, how much we could save for taxpayers if we provide support and work on prevention, early intervention, and healthy communities, and being instead of separating people, bring people together to support each other. I suppose a question I have is around, I think actually there's a
Can I make one more quick point on that, Sarah, real quick while you get the next question up? One of the things, and we talk about that, and we use the migrant thing that is being pushed now as a narrative across some Australian areas that we have instances with people coming through. I almost use, and this is a little bit controversial in some ways to say, but some of the skills that we teach and we work with in reintegrating people that come home from prison should be and could be used to assist migrant communities to integrate with their communities and to have their communities integrate with them. And I think that in case of, and that's just a justice reinvestment situation. I was having a really good conversation with Sophie Russell yesterday from the JRI, who again is another amazing practitioner in the space. And we were talking about exactly that and saying that, instead of opening up a $13 million machete drop process in Victoria that was next to police stations, encouraging kids to drop their machetes at the police stations anonymously, $13 million. How about we spend that $13 million on assisting with some community-based programming that can assist some of these so-called supposed migrant criminals into actually helping them get access to community services, get access to the welfare instances and education that we talked about in the first place, rather than it turning it into a criminological thing. Sorry, I get passionate about this, Sarah. Sorry,
No,
mate.
great. No, I totally agree. But I might just pass it over to Lindsay.
Hey,
you.
Lindsay.
Hi, Lucas. It's genuinely so nice to meet you. I just want to kind of contextualize. I work in New South Wales on Dara country in Western Sydney. I am fortunate enough to lead a multi-agency early intervention justice program called A Place to Go. We work in strong collaboration, with Justice Health in New South Wales, McKillop Family Services, and in the last 2 years have a new partnership with Syd West Multicultural Services, who are one of the lead organisations that support our migrant youth across Western Sydney. And we provide a range of interventions for young people, but very firmly diversion focused. And we're fortunate enough a couple of years ago to be given the opportunity to expand our service delivery and look at through kind of shared data across systems, finding more systemic gaps. Not surprising, particularly given your research and what you've shared with us. We are focused now on the 8 to 12 cohort with a really strong focus on educational engagement and looking at better preparing kids for stage 3 to 4 transition to high school as a really important stage that often, if they don't get support around, will arguably, to use your language, kind of, I think, accelerate the pathway to prison. I'm really curious. I mean, we're in early days. It's been 12 months of operations for us in that cohort. Our relationship with schools is very strong, but we're still now in the midst of trying to design a kind of suspension project to do, I think, probably some of the things that you are talking about in intervening differently to be inclusive for kids that have additional hardships rather than exclusive. Particularly given the intersections in the sense of belonging and identity and community in justice involved young people. I guess I was really interested in, understanding what you'd kind of share with us in terms of our thinking about sort of research base and what might work best in terms of that approach. It may well be a longer conversation, and I'm really keen to connect if that's within your remit.
Yep.
But I think, for our thinking, we really want to be really centered on the evidence when it comes to what's going to make a difference for kids when we are getting involved earlier, particularly in that early kind of first suspension phase, if not before, and trying to then work with schools around how do we, use their system and their language to kind of better support those young people, particularly given our alternate education settings are incredibly limited. And often it takes 18 months for kids to get in them, even when they're eligible. Yeah, thank you.
I think, Lindsay, I'm going to go backwards to go forward, so stick with me for a sec. The one big, really important point you made was about targeting now the 8-year-olds, because this needs to be a federal government change and a state government change as well, because a lot of the funding opportunities for care agencies or agencies to actually work with and assist don't start funding until 10 years of age. So you would notice this yourself. So you're effectively a pilot, and a great pilot in this, by steering that change, because we know that early intervention, this sounds so horrible to say what I'm about to say, but getting trying to early divert a 10-year-old is actually too late. For some of them, it's already happened. For some, mate, we had 10-year-old kids that were dealing with pregnancy, drug and alcohol, stuff that we see in adults, right? And we're dealing with more adult concepts than we were able to deal with ourselves now. So that's the first point, making sure that there is a change in that focus and a change in the data and how the data is collected from 8 years on. For example, let's use Western Australia in the education setting. Alternative education settings, and children are not funded, young people are not funded until year 8. So if any young person in year 7 or year 6 wants to go and try and go to a care school, they're not funded. They're not paid for. They don't match funding from government funding. So the schools, and we were lucky enough to have an amazing school that took on year 7s at deficit, at debt to the school, because they knew that those young people were going to be in the school for a while and they were missing out. Oh no, they need to go and try high school. No, they don't. You're giving them another year in this pipeline. So I think the data collection, Lindsay, on your point is really important. And this sounds nuts, but go with me on it. I'd actually be asking the kids what they think should happen if they misbehave. If they don't meet, we all have to punch in the clock of the social contract, right? So I could tell everyone that I've got Ugg boots on right now in a presentation, but that wouldn't fit the social context, right? So we have to fit the social context in this. So young people can put their points forward and say, maybe, okay, if you don't match this or this doesn't work, what would you see as acceptable? What would you see happening? What would you need for that behavior to take place? So if we were going to suspend you, what does suspension look like? What is suspension? Is suspension sitting in the principal's office with a book? Is suspension you not having the use of going to sport, going to music, going to do any of those things you like? What do you think it is? What does it look like for you? What does it feel like for you? And that goes a little bit to do with some of that Berry Street model, is that they really make this a cerebral experience. So what does suspension feel like for you? What should you feel? Should you feel shame? No. Should I feel embarrassed? No. Should I feel that I have been removed from or are doing something alternative? No. I should still be doing the same stuff, but it's the setting that changes. It's the setting and the parameter that changes, and we can do that as schools and we can do that as educators. Does that give a little bit of an answer, Lindsay?
That's helpful. Yeah.
And that's about 4 hours of me and you talking about that, mate, because we can't cover that in 3.5 minutes.
Let's do it. Thanks, Lucas. I appreciate it.
Thanks, mate.
Awesome. So we've got a few more questions. So I'll pass to Lorana, and then we have a question.
Be kind, Lorana.
Thank you.
Emma
Sorry,
Sam.
I'm just on my phone because my computer wouldn't work. I've got about a gazillion things to say here. As a parent of neurodivergent children who did not attend school effectively, and I actually went and helped set up an alternative school here in the ACT. But what I was going to say was about the youth justice policy stuff we've seen, unfortunately, in Queensland and Victoria. Obviously, atrocious policy. But I think what we've not seen enough of. I completely hold our leaders, our so-called leaders, our supposed leaders to account on this, is I would like to see more engagement with the community and with victims to say, okay, you're feeling scared. What do you need? What would be meaningful for you? Bringing them together with young people, because they've been sold a complete lie that tough on crime is the answer to the problems. They've been told a complete lie as to what our education systems are providing. They are for the most part ignorant, and that's generally not through any fault of their own, but some exceptions there, obviously. And I've generally found when I've spoken to members of the community and they come in with certain preconceptions about youth crime and the best way to address it, and I've been able to say, well, this is costing us a fortune. This is destroying, intergenerationally. They've been very receptive to hearing about alternative models. And they're just not, they're not getting that information. And, they think that tough on crime is effective, which obviously it's not. And that it's the only option, which of course it's not. So I think that any role that those of us who work in this space can also play in engaging with the community, and of course that's exhausting and frustrating work, to get that message out there. I'm not saying people aren't trying it, but we also need to absolutely hold the policymakers and politicians to account in not promulgating this absolute bloody lie, which is just so destructive.
Lorana, I couldn't agree with you more. And the way that we looked at it, and again, this is this Genchi Ginbutsu stuff, right? Go and speak to the people that are doing it, because what we see, and I think one of the analogies I've always used on this is it's like we're putting the information through 6 colanders, where it's not just one colander, it's one colander where the holes are this big. So that's what we're looking for. Next one's this big, next one's square, next one's circle, next one's only got one hole at the bottom. So by the time it gets to the people that it needs to get to, it's the truth and the essence of the message has changed 10 times, because it's now what they think they need it to be, because we've now got people that need to deliver that message based on their own employment, based on their own position in government or wherever they sit, because they think that's what the message is. So you're 100% right, Lorana, it's they don't get the reality of the space. They don't see it.
Really great reflections. I'll just go to a question from Emma and then a question from Sam, because we're running out of time here. So Emma said,
sorry, my fault.
Not your fault. No, this is great. Too good discussion. So Emma said, thank you so much, Lucas. Such an insightful presentation, really grounded in the evidence, and it resonated with me personally. As a parent of 2 neurodivergent children, I often find myself strongly advocating with their school around disciplinary approaches. So your presentation really resonates. I sometimes joke that I'm probably the school's biggest nightmare at the moment. I would be really interested in your thoughts on the most effective way forward to break this pipeline. From your perspective, what are the key system level levers across education, justice, and child protection that could realistically shift us away from punitive responses and towards more supportive, trauma-informed approaches?
Wow, that's a PhD topic.
Yeah.
That's 5 years of research right there in that question. All right, so I'll try. I'm going to do it a disservice because of how deep it is, but I'll try and give a couple of little bits in it. So we're in a really, really unique and messed up situation in Australian education. We have a massive teacher shortage. We have conditions in the school that are based on finances rather than delivery of outcomes. And those two things itself go to the points I made before, is without, with teacher numbers with student numbers at 40, changing things. My son's school, we got a letter at the end of last term. Hey, when you come back to school this term, we've broken the class in half from being grade 4 and 5 to now just being grade 4. So now they go into back to class now. First day back was Wednesday. There's 36 kids in the class now, right? There was 24 before they left. And now there's a whole new dynamic that changes. Now, the crazy thing is the 2 kids that had EA funding are now in the other class. So now it's 2 EAs and a teacher in the other class with their group. 1 teacher. That's it with that crew. Now, my young fellas, we'll say bordering on neurospiciness for the sake of a politically correct topic. He has really challenging emotional regulation. He, blows off at this, and there is some challenges he faces. And he is by no stretch of the imagination the most needy in his room in that class. But because of the definitions and what happens with disability and with challenges, we have some states and places that don't even recognize dyslexia as a disability, or dysmorphia as a disability, or dysgraphia as a disability, and don't fund it. ADHD is not funded as a disability. Now, we've worked with some in certain places. In some places it is, but in certain places. Now, we work in spaces where we've seen it. We've worked with ADHD kids who flatly cannot engage in mainstream education. Flatly can't. Doesn't matter how many modifications, how many changes we make, how many considerations are made towards it. It is just too challenging for them to do that, right? So when we're setting a mainstream square setting, which is current schools, that was designed hundreds of years ago to deal with the white rich kid that we needed to teach how to read first, and we don't have that now. We have cultural diversity, we have neurodiversity, we have other diversities that are inside this room, the simple setting is break down some of the crappy spending we're spending on and put it into the support of individual needs of the young people. Instead of spending $1 million a year on putting a kid in prison, drop that. Instead of spending 13 millions on effing machete collection things, put those into hiring 45 new EAs, 100 new EAs, 200 new EAs, and put them into a school 1 day a week if it's that's what it starts at, 2 days a week. Start looking at that type of element. If that stuff happens, then we're going to take a small step. We can't just magically wave the wand to fix this. We've got to take some small steps first. And it's about individually identifying the needs of the young people, because that will then change behavior. If we then change behavior, we then keep them out of that behavior modification element, which becomes criminalization.
Absolutely great response to a PhD question there, Lucas.